Hello and welcome to the Atoll, your home for Waterworld fandom. In today's video, we'll be uncovering everything we know about the turbulent relationship between Waterworld's leading star, Kevin Costner, and its idealistic director, Kevin Reynolds. So, without further ado, here is the story of the two Kevins. But first, let's start at the beginning because, of course, Waterworld was far from Costner's and Reynolds' first collaboration. Kevin Reynolds began his filmmaking career in the late 1970s when he decided, after several years of practicing law in Texas, to drop everything and begin studying film at the University of Southern California. Being older than his fellow students and already having some lived experience, Reynolds accelerated quickly through the university system with the goal of having a strong student film to show studios and a finished feature-length script that he could sell. And in fact, while working on his student film, Proof, he ended up meeting Kevin Costner for the first time. Costner, who was working odd jobs and taking nightly acting lessons, auditioned for a role in Proof, but ultimately Reynolds went with a different actor. Upon completing his student film, Reynolds had an incredible streak of good luck that helped launch his film career. Right out of film school, he was able to sell his first script, which would become the film Red Dawn. And through a university connection, he was able to get Steven Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy to view his student film, which they both loved and agreed to help him get the financial backing to turn it into a feature-length film. Once again, Kevin Costner showed up to audition for this new project, which would become the film Fandango, and this time around, Reynolds instantly knew that he would be perfect for the more fleshed out character he had written for the feature-length treatment of his student film. Fandango, a sort of Animal House-styled road trip movie, released in 1985, and would become Costner's first leading role, and a pivotal first step in his ascension to Hollywood stardom. And on the production of Fandango, the two Kevins found a healthy and friendly working relationship with each other. Both men were driven and passionate about filmmaking, shared a similar sense of humor, and a love for storytelling that involved personal tales set against big backdrops, like the westerns they had grown up with. After Fandango, Costner then had a string of hits that included Silverado, 1985, The Untouchables, 1987, Bull Durham, 1988, and Field of Dreams in 1989. This streak would culminate with Costner's directorial debut in 1990, Dances with Wolves, which he also produced and starred in. And Dances with Wolves would be the first time he teamed back up with Reynolds, who was an uncredited second unit director on the film and famously shot the exhilarating buffalo hunting scene. Now, I have to say, it's long been rumored that Reynolds himself secretively shadow directed the film Dances with Wolves, a rumor I can kind of understand just because it is pretty astonishing that Costner, a first-time director, was able to create such an acclaimed and now classic film, but both Kevins have refuted this rumor. Hot off the success of Dances, both Kevins were looking for their next project. At the time, 3 competing Robin Hood projects were being pitched to various Hollywood studios. Unknown to each other, Reynolds and Costner were actually both being courted to join these different Robin Hood films, but ultimately Reynolds chose to direct the script at Warner Brothers, and Costner soon joined as the film's leading man. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, released in 1991, would become the first project where we begin to see the Kevins clashing on creative differences. First, there is the much joked about English accent that Costner attempted in some of the first scenes filmed, but ultimately abandoned a ways into production. Reynolds had always advised that he not do the accent, saying that Costner did not have enough time to practice it before cameras started rolling. But the real conflict arose in post-production, and as we'll see, this will become a reoccurring theme. While on set, Reynolds had a great actor-director relationship with Alan Rickman, who plays the Sheriff of Nottingham, the villain in the film, and as a result, this character was expanded upon, and Rickman was encouraged to really play up the character for comedic effect. And so, Reynolds' first cuts of the film ended up having about equal amounts of Alan Rickman as Kevin Costner, and in fact these cuts received strong test screenings. However, the producers of the film became concerned that Rickman would upstage Costner, who was the star power driving the film, and in turn, Reynolds was asked to cut more and more of Alan Rickman's scenes. When Reynolds objected to the changes, his editor, Peter Boyle, was locked out of the editing room as the producers continued to tinker with the film. Ultimately, Reynolds walked away from the project during the final weeks of post-production, feeling that Costner did not do enough to intervene with the studio meddling of his cut of the film. And despite the film being a critical and box office success, the two Kevins went their separate ways. In the couple intervening years, the Kevins did not talk much, watching each other's careers from afar. However, by chance, both Reynolds and Costner became interested in a script that had been floating around Hollywood for a few years and at the time was owned by Largo Entertainment. That, of course, being the script for Waterworld. As we know, Waterworld, with its depiction of a flooded post-apocalyptic world, would be almost entirely shot on water, which would mean a very difficult and expensive production full of logistical hurdles. And for this reason, Universal Studios originally wanted Robert Zemeckis to direct the film, as he was a filmmaker that had proven to be very competent at technically difficult films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. However, when Costner agreed to throw his star power behind the project, he had two specific requests: that Charles Gordon produce and Kevin Reynolds direct. Costner felt that he and Reynolds, despite their differences on Robin Hood, could strike gold again, but when Reynolds heard that Costner was to star, he promptly said, "No thanks." Not dissuaded by Reynolds' initial rejection, Charles Gordon, along with his brother Larry Gordon, arranged a meeting of the Kevins at a hotel in Tahoe, California, where Costner was shooting The Bodyguard so that the two could talk out their differences. In the end, they agreed to collaborate on Waterworld with the understanding that there would be no power plays during production. Simply put, the actor would act and the director would direct. However, they could not start on Waterworld right away, as Costner was already tied to another movie, Lawrence Kasdan's Wyatt Earp. So, in the meantime, Kevin Reynolds decided to direct Rapa Nui, a film that tells a somewhat fictionalized story of the people that inhabited the extremely isolated island of Rapa Nui in the South Pacific, later known as Easter Island when discovered by European explorers. And, to show his confidence in their newly reinstated partnership, Costner agreed to sign on as a producer of Rapa Nui. And in preparation for writing this video, I actually watched all of Kevin Reynolds' films, and I would have to highly recommend Rapa Nui if you're a Waterworld fan. Its depiction of an isolated people surviving on a small stretch of dry land, unaware of what lies beyond the horizons, along with its underlying ecological themes, make it all feel like a spiritual prequel or sequel to Waterworld. And, like Waterworld, this film had an incredibly arduous production, with Reynolds choosing to shoot on location at the island of Rapa Nui, again, one of the most isolated places on Earth. And consequently, the film went $8 million over budget, most of which reportedly came out of Costner's pocket. Costner also gave notes to Reynolds concerning the script, but he refused to consider any of the suggestions. So it is good to keep all of this in mind, especially seeing that this was the film that led directly into the far larger production of Waterworld. Going into Waterworld, the Kevins were truly hoping to redefine 90s action films. Reynolds wanted to create a desolate world like a Middle Ages on water. Unlike other action movies at the time, he wanted the film to be character-driven and avoid cliches, especially cheesy one-liners that had started to define the genre. He also wanted the mariner to be absolutely ruthless in his pursuit of survival. And this is where Reynolds' vision started to differ from Costner's vision, with Costner wanting the mariner to be more heroic and likable from the beginning of the film. And as pre-production progressed, Costner, with the support of the studio, did take more control over writing and editing the script. And as the proposed budget grew and money started coming in from different investors, the film, without a finished script or even an actor cast to play the role of the Deacon, was forced to begin production in order to make it into the 1995 summer release schedule. Consequently, Costner and the writers continued to work on the script during the evenings even after they had begun filming, and it was at this time that Costner himself hired Joss Whedon, known for being a talented script doctor, to help finish the writing and rework some of the Mariner's lines. The studio also wanted to add a love story between the Mariner and Helen to create more interest for female audiences, basically banking on the fact that Costner had become a Hollywood heartthrob with movies like The Bodyguard. And even though Reynolds lost some control in the writing room, he remained strongly in charge of the camera and the shots being produced. Now, as we all know, Waterworld was a tremendously difficult production with its remote location on the Hawaiian Islands, along with the logistical problems of shooting on water. The production had many injuries on set, an ever-growing budget, a much longer than expected shooting schedule, and a press that sought to give the film a bad name before it was even finished filming. However, by most reports, the Kevin stayed as civil as possible while filming progressed. Dennis Hopper, who was actually not cast until 50 days into production, has said on several interviews that he never saw the two Kevins argue once, that they remained constant professionals. But behind the scenes, a silent war had begun between Costner and Reynolds. Reynolds, disappointed with his lack of control over the script, became more withdrawn and less communicative, not always giving the cast and crew a strong vision of the film that was being created. According to the production designer Dennis Gassner, in an article in Premiere magazine, it began to feel like no one was in control. As the production dragged on, the film's financiers became nervous, and so the heads of the parent companies that owned Universal Studios at the time, that being MCA, Mitsubishi, and Seagram, actually flew out to Hawaii to see in person what was causing the budget to blow up and see if they could do anything to control the situation. According again to the Premiere article, there was talk of firing Reynolds and even canceling the entire film and using it as a massive tax write-off, but in the end, Costner fought to keep Reynolds and for the production to continue moving forward without major cuts to the script, even putting his own money towards the film and giving up his contractual 15% of the studio's gross on the film. Despite the growing concerns from the higher-ups, Reynolds continued to indulge in the aspects of the film he felt were most important, namely the action sequences, especially the Atoll battle, which he spent over a month shooting despite being told to pare it down. Because of his devotion to these large-scale action scenes, the budget excess began to be blamed on Reynolds. And though the two Kevins became less communicative with each other on set, it is told in this Entertainment Weekly article that Reynolds always remained sympathetic about Costner's very public divorce that was taking place during the filming of Waterworld. Reynolds himself had already divorced his first wife and knew the anguish that goes along with that, and praised Costner for not letting it affect the filming schedule. And finally, in the spring of 1995, the filming of Waterworld was coming to a close, and it was time for Kevin Reynolds and his editor Peter Boyle to enter the editing room and start assembling the film. And as we'll see, this is where Costner's and Reynolds' relationship really began to crack. So typically, by contract, a director who is a part of the DGA, the Directors Guild of America, will be given 10 weeks to produce a director's cut of their film before receiving studio notes. Due to Waterworld going over schedule during filming, it was necessary to truncate post-production as much as possible in order to have the film finished for its July of 1995 release date. And giving into the pressure from the studio, Reynolds agreed to put together his director's cut in just 5 weeks, half of the usual allotted time. And a little over a month later, he produced a 2-hour and 40-minute cut. though he would contractually need to cut it down to under 2 hours and 15 minutes. However, the producers were not thrilled with Reynolds' first cut. They felt it was too dark and disliked the edgier, less traditional music score created by Mark Isham. And despite the film already being way over its target runtime, they also requested that more Costner be put back into the film, a very similar note that he was given when editing Robin Hood. Reynolds reluctantly agreed to take the studio's notes, given that he would still be able to create his own cut for a DGA screening, which, again, is a fairly standard practice in Hollywood filmmaking. Now, according to multiple articles, it was actually in Reynolds' contract that Costner could not interfere with the editing of the film in an attempt to avoid repeating the creative differences they had while working on Robin Hood. However, since Costner was also a producer on Waterworld, he was lawfully allowed to enter the editing process. And so, Kevin Costner and Charles Gordon entered the editing room to just spend a day making some tweaks to the latest cut of the film. But one day turned into a week, and Reynolds started to realize that Costner was not going to leave the editing room anytime soon. And it was at about this point that the studio made the call that they did not want to test screen Reynolds' cut of the film, and this ultimately was the final straw. Reynolds made the decision to leave the project in April of 1995, 3 months from the film's eventual release. But in defense of Costner and the producers, time was running out and the film was not coming together in a way they found satisfactory. Reynolds was perhaps overly focused on his director's cut and not prioritizing the studio's requested changes. And the producers on the film felt it was their duty to reduce the risk on investment that the studio had made, and you can't blame them for that. After all, this was the most expensive film ever created at the time. So, Costner essentially took over the role of director after Reynolds left. Along with the other producers, he worked to create a film closer to the studio's expectation, hiring James Newton Howard to quickly write a new musical score and even ordering some reshoots only weeks before the film's release. It should be noted that the two Kevins were quite public about their disagreements over Waterworld. In researching this video, I ended up purchasing quite a few old entertainment magazines that reported on Waterworld's production. In all of these articles, Reynolds and Costner throw quite a bit of shade at each other, and this is where we get those famous quotes like Reynolds saying, "In the future, Costner should only appear in pictures he directs himself. That way he can always be working with his favorite actor and his favorite director." In the end, Costner felt that Reynolds had abandoned his responsibilities and ignored the risk he had taken on the project, especially when considering Costner had invested his own money to make the film happen. In this Entertainment Weekly article, Costner says that he did not want to become the director and editor of the film, that he felt that he was trapped in the editing room when he wanted to be outdoors fishing and hunting after the long filming schedule of Waterworld. For Reynolds, Waterworld proved that large-budget films allowed for less on-set flexibility and experimentation, that the larger the budget, the less creative freedom he had. After Waterworld, he took some time off and, for his next movie, created the small-budget film 187, a stylish drama starring Samuel L. Jackson about inner-city public high schools. As for Costner, it seems he would actually take Reynolds' advice about only appearing in films he directs, following up Waterworld with another post-apocalyptic movie, The Postman. But that is a story for another time. However, you may be wondering what happened to the relationship between the two Kevins post-Waterworld. Well, in my research, I was actually surprised to see that they got them back in the same room in 2003 to record the commentary track for the special edition DVD of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And I've had a listen to it for myself, and I have to say, both men are quite cordial with each other. They laugh and make jokes and seem slightly embarrassed about the shortcomings of the film. In any case, in the closing minutes of the commentary track, the Kevins say this.
It was quite an adventure.
Yeah.
We ought to do another one.
Yeah, I think we should. We know we can make great ones together.
Yeah.
We know. You're an original filmmaker, and it's an original piece of work and a familiar tale.
And indeed, Costner and Reynolds would team up again in 2012, perhaps for the last time, to create the made-for-TV miniseries Hatfields and Mccoys. Based on a legendary multi-generational feud between two Southern families in the post-Civil War era, it was actually Costner who again requested for Reynolds to direct, feeling that Reynolds would have a good eye for the story. And I think this project totally makes sense for both Kevins from what they learned from their past ventures. The total runtime of the series is 6 hours long, allowing Reynolds to really flesh out the story without trying to fit it within the more confining structure of a feature film. The project had a fairly moderate budget, which gave Reynolds more freedom to experiment without the pressure from investors. Also, and this might come as a surprise, Hatfields and Mccoys was actually a quite location-intensive shoot, not unlike Waterworld and Rapa Nui, with it being filmed in Romania with a foreign non-English speaking crew, adding that challenge aspect to the production which always drove Reynolds' passion for filmmaking. But perhaps what makes the most sense of all for the two Kevins teaming up again on Hatfields and Mccoys is the fact that they really didn't have to work too much together. Costner, who, despite being given top billing, is not present in most of the scenes throughout the miniseries. But I feel that I should note that Hatfields and Mccoys was probably a pretty important step in Costner's career as he transitioned from a movie star to a TV star and would eventually have another even more successful multi-generational feud television series, that being Yellowstone. And for now, that's where we'll leave this tale of the two Kevins. Both men are obviously passionate, principled, and at times stubborn storytellers that are drawn to projects that challenge them in their craft. And in researching this video, I definitely sensed a sibling-like rivalry between the two, and perhaps this is born out of the fact that their careers have run so parallel to each other. Essentially, Reynolds discovered Costner, giving him his breakout role in Fandango, both rose to fame with projects like Dances with Wolves and Robin Hood, and then put back in their place with the trials of Waterworld, but ultimately found new success on the small screen with Hatfields and Mccoys. Overall, it's been a fascinating look back, and I think in the end, both men have shaped each other's lives and in turn given us some excellent and unforgettable movies. But there you have it, that is the story of Waterworld and its two Kevins. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and say hello in the comments before you go. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We are on the path to 10,000 subscribers and I'd love to see us get there before the end of the year. There's also the Atoll on Instagram for even more Waterworld content and the channel's email if you wish to reach out to us personally. Links in the description. But with that, thanks, as always, for joining me at the Atoll.